I had this amazing teacher named David Oliver that always used to say pain is information. And that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. He would say, pain isn't good. And I thought that part was pretty obvious. But then he'd say, pain is not bad. And that part I didn't necessarily agree with at that time. And then he'd say, pain isn't anything at all, it's just information. And it took me a while to really understand what he was saying. He said pain is information that something needs to change. And it took even longer to fully understand that and learn how to apply it because I was stuck in a cycle of pain and I didn't know how to change it. It took a long time for me to understand that not just pain, but all of my feelings were trying to teach me something. And the same is true for you, but without a method for identifying your feelings and some tools for extracting the teaching, all of that information can fall on deaf ears. Almost every uncomfortable emotion comes along with at least a little bit of denial, very often with a strong desire to blame someone else, sometimes tangled up with a whole lot of anger, and almost always wrapped up in some fear. And generally speaking, we were all built to run away from pain. And some of that's just evolution, thanks to the part of you that's obsessed with staying alive. So whether you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or just in a big fight with your boss, all of a sudden your nervous system is on fire. And we've all been programmed to do everything that we can to put out that fire. But if you're in a truly painful place, putting out that fire can feel like an impossible task. And the deeper you sink into that downward spiral, the more your mind starts running in circles. And instead of putting out the fire, you're actually stirring even more painful thoughts that are actually fanning the flames. And trying to find your way out of a really painful place with thinking usually doesn't work very well because your mind isn't always where the most important information is being held. It's like trying to put together a puzzle without having all the pieces. And the first missing piece is a shift in your head that brings you to a higher level of awareness. If you're watching this video right now, I have to believe that you're not in an immediately emergent situation. But this is the part where I always say, if you are in a really dark place, you probably don't need self-help videos right now. If you're struggling with extreme grief or trauma or addiction or any kind of abuse, I'll put some links in the description for places to reach out for professional help. And that's my advice. But I'm not talking about emergencies or tragedies, and I'm not talking about physical pain. Right now, I'm talking about emotional pain that walks hand in hand with all kinds of change. And I'm not diminishing that in any way. It can be incredibly intense. The pain that comes along with nearly every form of grief is based, at least in some way, on the fear of change. But change is always coming. There's only a handful of things that I know for sure in this life, and that's one of them. If you love anything that you've got right now in your life, put your attention on that and make sure you take the time to appreciate it because it's not going to be exactly like this forever. And the other side of that coin is especially bright because if you don't like what you've got right now, that's not going to last forever either. At least not exactly the way that it is right now. And if that sounds too simplistic, stick with me here for just a minute. The most intense sadness, the biggest heartbreaks, the most crushing losses all come with a sudden realization that life is almost certainly never going to be the same. And the more intense the loss, the bigger the change, the more terrifying that realization becomes. And there's this really famous C.S. Lewis quote that says, "No one ever told me grief felt so much like fear." And those words hit me like a ton of bricks the first time I heard them. I had never thought about it like that before. I wasn't just sad. I wasn't just grieving. I was afraid. I was afraid of what life would be like because I absolutely knew that it was never going to be the same. And even if you're not in the middle of a crushing loss, that quote still applies. We're all afraid of the unknown, at least a little bit. Because when facing the weight of the unknown gets too heavy, it's hard to know what to do. And that's another piece of the puzzle. Today, we're creating the first part of a bridge between awareness and action. And it applies to everything. If you've been following along, making any meaningful change does have a lot to do with knowing what you want and the kind of intentions you want to set. And feelings have so much to teach you about true desire. Growing awareness in your emotional world opens the door to so much information, especially when you're able to clearly identify what you might consider negative emotions. And obviously, in relationship to anything in your life right now that feels overtly painful. If you are suffering from any kind of grief or loss, I got to send out that big, huge disclaimer again. I am not trying to minimize that. I'm not. I'm not telling you to ignore it. And I'm not trying to suggest that you're doing anything wrong if that's what you're feeling. As a matter of fact, ignoring your feelings is probably the biggest part of the problem for a lot of us. I know it was for me. I suffered some real childhood trauma in an environment that conditioned me to stuff down what I felt and what I wanted and what I needed. And in my case, no one was actively trying to physically hurt me, but I did see and experience a whole bunch of things that were really scary. I was growing up in a house with one sick parent and another parent that took advantage of the fact that I was compliant. So I learned to fly under the radar. I didn't want to make any waves. And I was just a little kid. So if you're a little kid stuck in that environment, the only way to fly under the radar is to pretend you're okay, even if you're not. And I just kept doing that, flying under the radar for a really long time with a whole bunch of really important people in my life dying. And I just kept soldiering on through all of it. And that was a problem. If pain is the primary emotion, you probably already know why you're feeling it. That wasn't the problem for me. That part was obvious, but knowing what the problem is doesn't fix the problem. And if it's a problem that you can't fix or isn't yours to fix, you're still stuck with the feeling. And at some point, when you start feeling like you can't do anything about it, that's usually when most of us start ignoring our feelings. And as soon as you start ignoring your feelings, you're basically cutting yourself off from the part that you actually can do something about. It's like shoving the whole puzzle back into the box and hiding it in the back of the closet. There's something to learn here about yourself, something to learn about healing, and a whole lot to learn about the good things that are still there in the world around you. And that's true even if we're just talking about everyday emotions and minor changes. Still uncomfortable, but not horribly painful, because most of those feelings are just normal. They're a normal part of almost any process, and any kind of change can stir up discomfort and frustration and confusion, and all those feelings are normal. Those are just natural reactions in your nervous system that come from facing the more minor aspects of the unknown. And let's be honest, it's all unknown. None of us know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. And a lot of that discomfort comes from overthinking about how it's all going to work out. And that leads to a mix of emotions because there's so many possible outcomes. I mean, fear and excitement come from the same place. Sometimes nervousness in general is really just a combination of those two feelings. And that really is just information. It's your body working with your emotions to send you a signal that your brain hasn't quite picked up on just yet. And when you've got a whole bunch of mixed emotions, those signals can get really strong and really confusing. So it's worth it to take some time to consider the source. I always tell my students that are starting out on something entirely new that some amount of fear is to be expected. You really can learn to harness the energy of fear and turn it into excitement if you've got your head straight about why you're feeling it. If fear is coming from being unprepared, that's the part of you that knows what you need, telling you to spend more time preparing yourself. If it's coming from negative feedback from other people, you consider the source. If the feedback is valid, do something with it. And if it's not, Remind yourself that other people's opinions don't define you. But if it's just a generalized sense of nervousness, it might just mean that you care about what you're doing. And that's not a bad thing. That can actually be a source of motivation. And there are other emotions that aren't quite so easy to flip, like jealousy or envy or anger or resentment. But there's a whole lot of information in there about what needs to change. And you really don't want to look at this as a problem to solve. What you feel isn't a problem. It's the navigation system and the fuel that takes you in so many different directions. And you want to make sure that it's taking you where you want to go. And we talked a little bit about this last time. The emotions that I just listed have something to do with somebody else having what you want, or doing something that you don't agree with, or you doing something that you don't really want to do. And guilt, guilt has so much to teach you about what you want and where you want to go. And the same goes for shame and even blame. If you have done something clearly, obviously wrong, especially if you're ignoring it or blaming someone else for what you did or why you didn't, that's telling you to set your intentions on cleaning that up and doing the right thing. How good would that feel to have that cleaned up and out of your head? That would definitely send your energy moving in the right direction. And if you haven't done anything wrong, any amount of guilt or shame is probably telling you that you absolutely do need to take better care of you and clean things up on the inside with you and be nicer to you. Those emotions come with a very obvious call to set your intentions on healthy boundaries and creating a healthier self-image and believing that what you want and need and feel is important. You start asking yourself about why you've been feeling those seemingly negative emotions, and you'll probably find a big long list of very clear intentions to set. These two aspects of intention and emotion are always working together very closely. And the secret to success in any new venture is to line up with what you want and what you feel. You're always looking to make a match there. And a lot of that has to do with being brave enough to really feel your feelings, not pushing them down or ignoring them anymore, but letting them come to the surface because they're trying to teach you something. Feelings are just a response to what's happening in your environment, your body, and your head. They're really just there to offer information and not just to get you to take your hand off the hot stove or run away from a hungry lion. Emotions are highly advanced tools, and it really does help to learn how to study them effectively. That's where situational awareness, emotional intelligence, and emotional literacy take center stage in this practice. And it really is a practical aspect. If a strong feeling comes up, I want you to sit with it for a second. And if it correlates with a feeling in your physical body, I want you to see if you can name it. Where is it and what does it feel like? And then take out a notebook, if you've got one, and write just a few sentences about any thoughts that have been going through your head. Are those emotions that you're feeling directly related to something that you've been thinking? What happened there? And just the facts. Why are you thinking about that so much? And I don't want you to spend too much time on that part. Don't get lost in the story. Just identify the event very briefly without going into detail. And then I want you to see if you can name the emotion itself. I think it helps a lot to write that out as a question. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? And then write or say out loud, or at least name that emotion in your head. And there is no right or wrong to this. This is just practice. Sometimes what you're feeling is a mix of emotions. So if more than one answer comes to mind, write it all down, but briefly. You're just identifying the feeling and giving it a name. And the point of this exercise is really basic. If you ask the question, your brain is going to go off looking for an answer. That's happening all the time, whether you know it or not. Even if you don't know exactly what you're feeling, that question is going to get a response of some kind. Even if you just feel like you're guessing you're doing it right. And once you've got an answer to that question, if the emotion attached to it feels in any way negative, flip that around in your head. What you really want, what you really want to have, and what you really want to feel is probably the opposite of that seemingly negative emotion, right? especially if it's outright painful. The exact opposite, at least to some extent. What would the positive side of that negative coin feel like? How would it feel to grow more of that in your life? And you don't have to have how to do it figured out. Right now, you're just trying to figure out what it is. That's the last part of this little mini practice. Write down the opposite emotion. Now, you can also absolutely do this with a good feeling, and I hope you do. You can do this with feelings that you want to grow in almost exactly the same way. If you've got a feeling that's already taking you in the right direction, or even if you're just in a moment where something feels really good, do the same thing. Name the emotion. Ask yourself what it is and why you're feeling it. Name it, and then take a few minutes to write down a few ideas for how to get more of that in your life. And if any of that still feels hard to do, make sure you subscribe so you get the notifications and come back next time. We'll talk about how to sit with it and work with it until it gets easier.